Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I congratulate Senator Sessions, Senator Coburn for their principled remarks about the phenomenon of Washington spending. We're spending 40 cents. We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. We can't keep spending money we don't have. And we want to save Medicare. So those two major difficult decisions are things we need to work on together. Stopping spending money we don't have and saving Medicare. And we can do both. Put our minds to it. Mr. President, I'd like to speak. I ask consent to speak for up to 15 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you could let me know when 1 minute remains, I would appreciate it. Mr. President, last month, the Acting General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board filed a complaint against the nation's largest exporter, the Boeing company with 170,000 some employees, 155,000 of them in the United States, a company that sells airplanes around the world, makes them in the United States. The complaint basically said that it was prima facie evidence of illegal discrimination because Boeing has decided to build an airplane production plant in South Carolina. The point being that Boeing's main operation is in Washington State, a state without a right-to-work law, and South Carolina is a state with a right-to-work law. This notwithstanding the fact that Boeing is adding 2,000 employees in Washington State. It's nearly finished this new plant in South Carolina, spending $1 billion, hiring 2,000 people, and all of a sudden here comes this complaint. This is not just a South Carolina matter, it affects the entire country, and many of us have spoken out about it. I want to review it just for a moment. This complaint against Boeing is just one indication of the administration's anti-business, anti-growth, and anti-jobs agenda. That's why Senators Graham, DeMint, and I, actually there are 34 senators who are co-sponsoring this bill, have introduced the Job Protection Act to protect right-to-work states and employers from an independent government body run amok. Our bill preserves the federal law's current protection of state right-to-work laws in the National Labor Relations Act and provides necessary clarity to prevent the NLRB from moving forward in its case against Boeing or attempting a similar strategy against other companies. Now it seems that the NLRB wants to change the rules governing how and when a company can relocate from one state to another. According to a May 10th internal memorandum from the NLRB General Counsel's office, it wants to give unions power over major business decisions and require companies such as Boeing to collectively bargain if the company wants to relocate a facility. As was explained by James Shirk, a senior policy analyst in labor economics, and Hans A. von Spakovsky, a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, in a recent article in National Review Online, quote, NLRB wants to force companies to provide detailed economic justifications, including underlying cost or benefit considerations for relocation decisions to allow unions to bargain over them, or lose the right to make those decisions without bargaining over them. Either way, businesses would have to negotiate their investment plans with union bosses, unquote. Shirk and von Spakovsky describe this as a heads I win, tails you lose scenario for the unions. These decisions belong at the corporate boardroom, Mr. President, not at the collective bargaining table. The goal of this National Labor Relations Board seems to be to place the interest of organized labor over those of business, shareholders, and economic growth. Their means is to change well-established law governing business decisions under the National Labor Relations Act. The Supreme Court has risen that a, quote, employer must have some degree of certainty beforehand as to when it may proceed to reach decisions without fear of later evaluations labeling its conduct an unfair labor practice, unquote. Under the Dubuque packing case and subsequent NLRB jurisprudence, a company may make a major business decision such as relocation outside of collective bargaining. Accordingly, the burden is initially on the NLRB General Counsel to establish that an employer's decision to relocate work is unaccompanied by a basic change in the nature of the employer's operation, such as being part of an overarching restructuring plan. The Dubuque case test was most recently applied by the NLRB in holding that a company, the Embark Corporation, did not violate the law by refusing to provide information about or bargain over a planned relocation of its Nevada call center to Florida. Both of those happen to be right-to-work states, as Tennessee is. In a concurring opinion, the NLRB Chairman Lieberman expressed her desire, though, to change the rules governing relocation decisions and collective bargaining. The chairman noted her displeasure that, in her words, the law doesn't compel the production of information fully explaining the underlying cost of benefit considerations of a company's relocation decision. The chairman then suggested requiring employers to provide unions with economic justification wherever there was a, quote, reasonable likelihood that labor cost concessions might affect an impending decision to relocate. In practice, the burden would shift to the employer before making its relocation to advise and explain to its union the basis for its decision supported by detailed economic justification. Then, if it does turn on labor costs, the employer would be required to provide the union with the information supporting the labor cost savings underlying its decision. If the employer failed to provide such information and labor costs were a factor, it would be precluded from making those decisions without collective bargaining. Following this decision against Embark Corporation, the NLRB Associate General Counsel issued an internal memorandum on May 10, suggesting that Chairman Lieberman's new test should now be examined and considered in all cases concerning relocations that come before the board. Now, I'm all for requiring employers to provide advance notice to their labor organizations and offering the economic reasons for proposed relocation, a shutdown, or a transfer of existing or future work. Providing notice and reasoning is already required under existing law and jurisprudence. We included this in our Jobs Protection Act just to make sure the spirit of the law was maintained. But what the NLRB and General Counsel are now proposing goes much further, changes understood law, and places an unreasonable burden on employers. As was observed by Shirk and Spakovsky, this new test would raise the cost to businesses by dragging on collective bargaining, by preventing them from legally executing a decision that's in the best interest of their shareholders until bargaining hits an impasse, and forcing them to provide detailed economic justification and negotiate their investment plans with union bosses before having the right to execute a relocation plan. Effectively, it would give a union a seat at the board of directors through the force of law and tip the scales of justice in their favor. If employers don't comply, then they'll lose the right to later claim that their relocation decision did not have to be collectively bargained under the National Labor Relations Act. So, as with the NLRB Acting General Counsel's action against Boeing, this potential new posture by the Office of General Counsel represents a departure from well-established law. They don't like the outcome, so they want to change the rules and give unions greater leverage over their employers who provide the jobs in the first place. They're more concerned about producing outcomes and facilitate the collective bargaining process rather than those that foster economic growth, exports, and jobs. Those decisions are best left to the owners, officers, shareholders, and directors of businesses, not organized labor, not the federal government. This potential change in well-established law would be another blow to manufacturing growth and expansion in the U.S. and further incentive for manufacturers to expand or open a new facility in Mexico, in China, in India to meet their growing needs. Republicans are not the only ones who are outraged by the direction the NLRB seems to be headed in recently. William Gould, who chaired the NLRB during the Clinton administration, was recently quoted in Slate magazine expressing his unease with the board's recent actions. Specifically, he said, quote, "The Boeing case is unprecedented," unquote, and that he, quote, "doesn't agree with what the acting general counsel has done by trying to equate an employer's concern with strikes that disrupt production and make it difficult to meet deadlines with hostility toward trade unionism," unquote. That's the Clinton LRB general counsel. Coming back to the Boeing issue, which is set to be heard by an administrative judge on June 14th, recent comments in the press from NLRB spokeswoman shed further light on how their agenda flies in the face of the very concept of capitalism. On May 19, various press outlets quoted this spokeswoman, suggesting that the NLRB acting general counsel would drop his case against Boeing if Boeing agreed to build 10 planes in Washington rather than 7. Specifically, she said, quote, "We're not telling Boeing they can't build planes in South Carolina. We're talking about one specific piece of work, 3 planes a month. If they keep those 3 planes a month in Washington, there's no problem," unquote. So they can build planes in South Carolina, just not the 3 they'd planned to. So now the federal government, or the NLRB, is sitting on Boeing's board and determining the means of production for American industry. While the economy continues to struggle, and in my state we've had 24 months of 9% unemployment. Mr. President, our job is to make it easier and cheaper for the private sector to create jobs. The National Labor Relations Board is not acting in the best interest of American workers through its continued attempts to depart from well-established law and dictate integral business decisions to companies. I ask unanimous consent to include in the record a memorandum from the Associate General Counsel of the NLRB dated May 10, as well as an article to which I referred from National Review Online dated May 16.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, if I may, I ask unanimous consent that morning business be extended until 9 p.m. with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.